Good morning and welcome to PGM International Symposium this year, 2020. And thank you for staying with us for our 6 days today. And it's been really amazing to have all these wonderful guests coming in from around the world to join us and exploring the ideas of is the virtual real. Okay, and today we have an honor to have Dr. Elisa and Alan Pierson as our guests today for this morning. So if I can hand it to you, Dr. Elisa. Thank you, both of you. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. Hi everyone. It gives me really great pleasure today to introduce Alan Pierson to you. He's a wonderfully gifted conductor and a really boldly creative music director. The New York Times has described Alan as a musical visionary, and I think that's a very fitting and well-deserved description. Alan Pierson is an artist who's always looking for and finding new ways to connect with audiences. He's never afraid to rethink and challenge conventions and traditions. And I personally find his energy and enthusiasm for new music to be quite contagious. So Alan is the artistic director and conductor of the acclaimed new music ensemble Alarm Will Sound, which has been called the future of classical music by the New York Times, and a sensational force with powerful ideas about how to renovate the concert experience by the New Yorker. Alan also served for 3 years as the artistic director and conductor of the Brooklyn Philharmonic, while under his leadership, Alex Ross of the New Yorker described the orchestra as remarkably innovative, perhaps even revolutionary. Alan has appeared as a guest conductor with orchestras including the Los Angeles Philharmonic, the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, the Hamburg Symphony, the London Sinfonietta, the Tanglewood Music Center Orchestra, the Silk Road Project, and so many, many others. He's also the principal conductor of the Dublin-based Crash Ensemble and co-director of the Northwestern University Contemporary Music Ensemble, and he's been a visiting conductor at Indiana University and the Eastman School of Music. So Alan received bachelor degrees in physics and music from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and a doctorate in conducting from the Eastman School of Music. He's also recorded for Nonsuch Records, Cantaloupe Music, Sony Classical, and Sweet Spot DVD. Alan, we're so happy to have you with us here this morning, this evening, and everything in between, you know, across the world through space and time. So welcome. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Alyssa. It's really nice to be here and and talking to all of you. And thank you so much for that really lovely introduction. That was was really kind. I'm going to correct one thing you said, which is that I definitely get afraid sometimes. And doing the kind of work that we do, and especially the work I'm going to talk about today, is sometimes really scary. I feel like I'm used to sort of feeling like I know what I'm doing and know what I'm talking about, and the pandemic has shaken me very far out of that experience. So, when you first came to me and invited me to participate in this conference and give this talk about creating musical communities during the pandemic, my first reaction was that I don't know anything about that. Like that, I have no wisdom to offer, because my experience during the pandemic has been one of figuring things out as I go along, and of feeling a little like an inexperienced teenager again, sort of grasping at ideas and trying to teach myself new skills on the go. And it's been really hard and it's been exhausting. And it's left me with way more questions than answers. But I'm going to share my experiences of making music during this time. And I'll share some ideas that I've worked on and the challenges I've had along the way, and some successes, some not so successes about making music in the pandemic. And I'll be honest about what I don't know. And I hope that some of that will be helpful for you all. And I'll leave time at the end for some questions. So Let me start with where I was at the very first phase of the pandemic back in March. So I, as Alyssa mentioned, I am the music director of the new music ensemble Alarm Will Sound. And we've been making music together for 20 years. And we are used to seeing each other all the time and collaborating and working together on a regular basis, although we live spread out all over the country. And then in March, suddenly all that changed and we weren't seeing each other anymore. And, you know, I was quickly, early in the pandemic, seeing people doing really interesting things, making music online and sharing music making online. And at first, I didn't know how I could contribute. I wanted to contribute in some way, but, you know, I'm a conductor and my role as a conductor is to facilitate large groups of people, large communities of musicians making music together, hopefully in a way that is impactful. And that is a kind of thing that was really hard to figure out how to do in this new era that we were suddenly thrust into. I'm not a virtuoso at an instrument. I couldn't go and make music on my own. But I wanted to try to find some way to do what I feel like I'm here to do, which is to bring people together to make music in an impactful way in this moment. And so I began thinking about the tools that I had on hand. And first and foremost is a really amazing community of musicians I work with, which are the members of Alarm Will Sound, who are a phenomenally talented collaborative group of musicians and of creative people who suddenly were at home with their instruments, with the technology they had at their disposal, laptops and phones and some of them microphones and the internet. And so I started thinking about, well, what are ways that we can use those tools and these creative people to make music together. And so we began having regular conversations. Alarm Will Sound, whenever we get together, has a meeting, a group meeting, where the whole group, and they're like, it's a group of 16 players and then you know, me and other staff people. And we always get together every time and have a conversation about the group and about where we're going and about what we want to be doing. And so we started doing that online and began thinking about how to adapt the organization and our music making to the time at hand. And so I started brainstorming a couple of ideas for musical projects. I think one of the first ones was an idea about a piece that was arranged for Alarm Will Sound by one of our percussionists, Chris Thompson. And it's an arrangement of a short piece of music by a British artist who goes by the name Game Show Outpatient. And it's a track called Vol Sweeps Up. And we've played it live a few times. It's fiendishly difficult in live performance. It's extremely fast and like whimsical and delightful, but also extraordinarily hard. Chris has the entire ensemble playing in parallel motion, playing different overtones of a two-part melody. So we're all playing this two-part melody together, but playing like different harmonics in the overtone series. And then Chris creates these filter sweep effects that are like an acoustic version of the electronic effect you're used to hearing, where a filter sweeps across a sound, bringing out, you know, first low overtones, then high overtones, and then low ones again. And the way that Chris does this in his arrangement is that the players who are playing these various overtones fade in and out in a very specific way to create the filter sweeping effect. It's a really, really cool piece. And I thought we could do something really neat by visually arranging the players in a grid and then having their images fade in and out across the screen to create visually the sound, visually the look of the filter sweeping effect that you'd be hearing the musicians play. And I thought this would be cool, but you know, it was a little hard to imagine it. So I taught myself this very simple like kids programming language called Scratch to make a mock-up of what this would look like. And we did a little demo. I'm gonna actually show you the video demo that I created. And I'll play it, you'll see the video demo along with the actual audio recording of the players playing their parts. And this video is not done yet. This is still a work in progress. So hang on a second. Let me see if I can Right. Okay. Okay. Here we go. Okay. So I made that mock-up, and then people thought that, you know, everything in Alarmable Sound always goes through a process of discussion. So like, you know, I shared that mock-up, and people thought that was cool, and we set about making the video. So, you know, all the players had a click track, and they recorded their parts at home. And we found some challenges with this. One is that it is, you know, we're used to doing really hard music together in Alarmable Sound. But it's a really different thing when you're in a group, in a room together, taking on a challenge socially together, interacting with each other. It's very different than what it feels like being at home all by yourself with a click track in your ear, just alone trying to play this really ferociously hard thing. It's a little demoralizing in a way that it's not when you have your friends around to, like, you know, cheer you on, and you hear each other make mistakes, and you hear other things in the room besides your own imperfect execution of this really, really hard piece of music. So people found it tough. And especially, obviously, this was a time, you know, we were in early April by this time, and it was an anxious time. So it was hard to record. Also really hard to look like you were having fun while you were doing this. And the music is so rambunctious and goofy that the sense of playfulness was a really important part of what we were going for in the video. And that also was challenging. And, you know, we're musicians. Like, none of us is used to being our own video director and lighting designer and recording engineer. And suddenly we're all having to do that. The other challenge that we ran into is that, you know, like, I came up with this idea in March, and we started working on it in April. And the idea was pretty fresh in March. By the time we got to April, and especially May, it was amazing how quickly the idea of putting out a video where, like, all the players would be in squares around the screen, how quickly that idea aged. It felt like a really hot new idea in March, and by May, we were also tired of it. So this video still isn't done. We're still working on it because we've had to, it's been slower than we imagined to create because of all these challenges. And we've had to develop the concepts to make it keep up with the time and to still hopefully feel fresh. So this is coming out in a few months, or in probably a month, maybe. We'll see. It is very hard to know how long things take these days. The other idea I came up with at about the same time was for a video based on a piece that the composer John Luther Adams wrote for us. And it's a piece called 10,000 Birds. And 10,000 Birds is a piece of music that John wrote for us based on bird songs and other sounds of the natural world. And it's an unusual piece of music in that while all the music is written out, the piece is entirely open with regard to the sequence of the events and with regard to what is simultaneous versus sequential. And I'll give you a little taste of this by showing a bit of the score, which is not really a score in the conventional sense. So let's see, hang on a second. Right, so here's I'll show you a few pages of John Luther Adams's score for 10,000 Birds. So this is one of the songs, Black-Capped Chickadee, which is scored for Glock and tambourine. And here's another one, Carolina Chickadee, also scored for Glock and tambourine. This one is Eastern Phoebe, scored for Glock. And you'll see there's also a violin part, but there's nothing that tells you where the violin part is played in relation to the Glock part, nor is there anything that tells you where Black-Capped Chickadee is played in relation to Carolina Chickadee or Eastern Phoebe. And the score goes on like this. There are lots of these different bird songs, but no instructions about sequence. So it's a piece that introduces really interesting challenges and demands a kind of creativity for me as the music director that most repertoire we do doesn't. So I designed the premiere production of this piece back in 2014. And that premiere production is designed around a kind of 24-hour cycle. So the piece begins with the song Wind, which is just wind players making air through their instruments with the kind of motion of the instruments that John designed. It goes from that into a morning section, which is the songs that birds sing in the morning. And then from morning moves into afternoon, midday, and then evening, where you hear the songs that birds sing at evening. And then night, which is not really bird songs, but more frog sounds and calls. And then after night, we come to a second morning. And so the piece ends the way it begins. And so there is a sense of a cycle to the piece. So I created a sequence of songs to fill out that cycle. Some of them are solos, some are for the ensemble, some happen alone, some happen in simultaneity with other songs in the piece, and planned out which songs are played where, because it's a spatial performance. It's not a piece that we play on a stage, but rather it's a spatial experience where we are around the audience. And the players move during the performance, and the audience also moves. The audience gets to choose their path through the performance. And it's a piece that's meant to connect you as an audience member to nature and to your own awareness of the sounds of nature. So it is meant to be like the experience of walking in a park and hearing birds around you and having your attention drawn to one place and then to another. An ideal performance of the piece takes place in a space where there's some containment of the sound. So like not a totally open environment, but a place where there's maybe a ceiling, maybe a wall, but where there's a feeling of connection to the outdoors and where there are sounds of the outside world that then become part of the piece. So the concept I had for a pandemic era version of 10,000 Birds was that everybody would film themselves playing their parts at home. And a liberating thing about this was that because of the way the piece is coordinated, which you got a little taste of looking at the score, there's no need for a click because there's no shared pulse that everyone has. So everybody and all the members of the group knew this piece really well because we played it a bunch, recorded their parts on their own independently at home. And then my idea was that I would use all of the screen devices I could find, tablets, phones, laptops, to create a kind of home installation of the piece. And just like how in a live performance, the players take places around the space, here I would place devices around my apartment, and each device would have a player on it. And then instead of the audience members independently walking through the apartment, walking through the terrain of the space and of the piece, it would be me with my camera navigating a path through my apartment and reacting to the sounds happening around me. My goal was to make a 5-minute condensed version of the piece, which felt to me like it would be long enough to get in the whole 24-hour cycle that we do in a live performance, but short enough that I hoped I could sustain interest, in an internet video. And I imagine the video as a kind of representation of life in the pandemic, and of the kind of daily rituals that we were all going through during that time. And the dream of getting to be with friends, represented here by all of my actual friends who are the players in the piece, and of making music, which was something that I and I think a lot of us were missing at that time. And also the dream of escaping into the outside world. I had this idea that at the end of the piece, after I'd taken a path through the whole apartment, that I would leave the apartment, exit out the window onto my fire escape, and sort of ascend the fire escape as a kind of into the clouds, as a kind of fantasy of leaving this apartment where I was locked down and getting out into the world again. I also imagine the piece as a kind of pandemic dream where like I wake up and I find myself in my bed, but in this strange other reality version of my home where my apartment is filled with these strange bird-like instruments making sounds that I keep discovering as I wander through the apartment. And I thought that I should do the whole video in a single take. And that was going to be a challenge, I knew, but I felt like, it would be easy to film it in sections. But like, I felt like if I did that, the breaks between one shot and another would completely interrupt the flow of the experience and ruin the feeling of the video as a single viewer's experience of this surprising environment. And I've always been a fan of single take film like Birdman or Russian Ark. So the idea of making my own like single take film was really exciting. Also terrifying because I am not in any way a filmmaker and had no experience doing this. So I started talking with people about this idea back in, I guess, what would have been late March. And the first reactions weren't great. I shared it with my assistant, who's a brilliant percussionist and artistic leader, Peter Ferry, who's my artistic director in Alarmable Sound. And his first reaction was like, well, maybe this could be like a 30-second thing, but it doesn't seem like a 5-minute thing. And it doesn't seem like worth a lot of work, which it sounds like your idea is going to take. But Peter's advice was to follow my bliss, which is an expression I hadn't heard before, but have come to love. And I talked about it with my boyfriend, who I live with and I was quarantining with, Paul. And his reaction was, well, I'd like to actually get to spend some time with you sometime. And it sounds like this might mean that I wouldn't get to spend any time with you. So no one was expressing a lot of enthusiasm for the idea. And I wasn't super confident in it myself because I don't have experience as a filmmaker and, didn't feel like I really knew, what would make a scintillating 5-minute video. But I felt like it was something I had to do. And so I started working on it. All the players made their recordings. They all filmed themselves at home playing their songs from 10,000 Birds. And I started by reviewing them and finding the parts that I wanted to use, and then creating an audio mock-up of the piece like a piece of electronic music by taking each player's song or the section of it that I wanted to use and putting it in a track, in like a big multi-track recording project. And the idea was that each track eventually would be a single device in this installation that I was going to create. And so then, I cut and moved around everyone's audio material to get the various tracks into the relationship that I wanted. And then also adjusted the level of each track to approximate the level I imagined that device would sound at as I was walking through the apartment. So for a part of the piece where I was going to be really close to a certain device, I would turn it up. And then as I imagined that I would leave the room and go somewhere else in the apartment, I would turn that track down. So I created a kind of electronic music audio version of the piece. And I'll just play a little bit of that for you. Sorry, 1 second. Right. Okay. So this is the beginning. Oops. Ugh. Okay, here we go. This is the beginning of the piece, and you'll hear the sounds of wind, which is how the piece begins, followed by the first bird songs, and then when the trombone comes in, that's the first song we hear from the kitchen, which is the second room I go to, and then you'll hear the sort of kitchen sounds take over after that. This is like the first minute of the piece. So that's a taste of what the beginning of the piece in the sort of audio mock-up that I made to compose it. And I rehearsed with this. So what I would do is I would put that recording on headphones while walking around my apartment with my phone, imagining filming, filming the various devices where I thought they would be, and then adjusting the timing of everything until it was just right. Then once that was done, I had to make all the videos actually create the audio composition that I made with this multi-track recording. And each video is only playing one player's part in this whole composition. And that meant not just making the separate video files, but also coming up with a plan for triggering all the devices at a specific time in a specific order. And so I made a click track that was played all around my apartment and had to add the right amount of time at the beginning of each video so that they would all start at the right point, taking into account how long it would take me to run from one to another and start them all in the right sequence. So obviously this was a truly absurd amount of work, and something that I can't imagine having done in anything approaching normal life. It also became clear as I started, getting deeper into planning this, that this was going to be a project that would completely take over my apartment. And after realizing this, I very gently brought this up to Paul and suggested that since, well, surely he wasn't going to get any work of his own done while I was filming this, maybe he could help with the triggering of the various devices. And thankfully, Paul agreed to that. And I would love to show you a little bit of what the triggering sequence is like, which we have in a behind the scenes video that I think Anote is queued up to play. Anote, can you play that first video? I'll let you know when to stop. Go to the kitchen window. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, start. Paul goes to the 10 fight drawing, Alan goes to the counter. Grab the slip mask and get into bed. This is take 9. 5, take 9. 4, 3, 2, 1, start. Paul go to the centerpiece. Okay, I think we can stop it there. That just gives a taste of it. So that's a taste of what the triggering sequence is like. And obviously getting this right was very, very hard and took an enormous amount of practice. Luckily, I have a significant other who really likes rehearsing, which is probably every conductor's dream. He might like rehearsing almost as much as I like rehearsing. And we rehearse this a lot. And this project, this 10,000 birds, which we ended up calling 10,000 screens / 10,000 birds, really became our project. Paul didn't just do the triggering, he became a true collaborator on the project and was deeply involved in creating one particular moment in the show that, that turned out to be particularly challenging. And Anote, this is the second video. I was really excited about when I was first envisioning doing 10,000 Birds here was bringing in John's song Wing Whistles. And when we do it live, the players actually run past making these bird flapping noise sounds. And so imagine that you're going to run back and forth with the two cell phones, one for Stefan on cello and one for Courtney on violin. This piece is all about making do with what you have at home, and one of the awesome things at home here is my boyfriend Paul, and so I envisioned this as being a role for him where he would run by the camera with the phones with the string players on them, and I was really excited about that. And we filmed it, and then we got a bunch of feedback that said,
yeah, people thought it was a little distracting to have a figure running through the space. I came up with a way to fly the phone across the doorway.
Let's try some options.
Sounds good. We had a snowshoe pole with a tennis ball on the end, and there's a, I guess a wooden spoon from which there's wire wrapped, which holds the phone. It's clearly much better.
It's so much better.
Clearly way better.
Hey, so something that I've been figuring out as I've been doing these early tests here is cool. So that gives you a little sense of the kind of work and creativity and problem solving that the project took. We spent many days on this and did dozens of takes. I kept expecting an experience of, that was it, we nailed it. Because, I'm used to doing studio recording where, you do something again and again and again, and eventually, like, you have a large group, but they're all professionals, they know how to do their jobs, and eventually everyone gets it right. And we never quite had that. This was very much a whack-a-mole experience where there just kept being new challenges and new things going wrong. And it was also an experience where Paul and I were alone in the apartment. It was just the two of us doing things that we're not professionals at. We were our own video crew, our own audio engineers, our own stage manager, our own prop dresser, our own set dresser, our own lighting designer. And that for me is sort of what the pandemic experience has been, this experience of learning how to take on new skills, learning to be responsible for things that you're not used to being responsible for, and doing a really imperfect job at it. So we spent a huge amount of time on this, and after all that came out with something that I'm really proud of, and a video that I think it's a very emotional piece, and I think that comes through in the video, and the responses have been very gratifying and rewarding. I'm not going to show the video now because we don't have that much time together, but I will, I'm going to just paste a link in to the chat, which you all can check out later. I encourage you to watch it. It's going to be a project that I've really, it's very meaningful to me, and I'm happy for people to see it. One other experience that I learned in this, that was a pretty intense learning experience for me, is about the importance of telling your own story. My initial plan was that we would make this video and then just put it out when we were done, which is kind of what I was used to from the old era, where like I am a conductor, I focus on making the art. When the art is made, there are other people's whose job it is to get the story out, bring in the audience, figure out how to be sure people pay attention. And that is very much not the world that we're in now. There's a incredible power that comes with the fact that anybody can put out content and put it out online, and then anybody can go see it. But there's also a real downside to that, which is that it is then entirely on you to be sure that the content doesn't just vanish up people's social media feeds. And having put all this time into this, it felt it felt very, very emotionally important to me that people get to see it, and that this not be a project that just sort of scroll up into and quickly become forgotten amid all the other torrent of online work that people are seeing. So we had a big debate within Alarmable Sound about how to handle this, and eventually we decided to delay the release of the video to give us time to tell the story of it. And so we hired a publicist, which is something we hadn't really done before as a group, and we made a bunch of behind the scenes videos, which you're seeing some of here, and then put those out there as a way to help tell the story and build anticipation for the project. And the response, that work paid off. The response to the video was, as I said earlier, really gratifying. And we gave a kind of preview release on a show that Nadia Sirota created called the Living Music Pirate Radio Edition show. And Nadia had me onto the show and I performed the piece, and then we did a kind of conversation together about the experience of making the piece. And Paul was there too, and we talked together about it. And that show was streamed live. And I was struck by the feeling of this very special kind of gathering that happened where, all these people from the musical world came together in real time to watch Nadia's show and see this performance and talk with us about the piece. And it was the closest thing I'd had to a concert experience in months, even though we were all sitting at home alone. there was this experience of seeing and connecting with friends and colleagues on the live stream. And that got me thinking about the importance and the value of liveness to our musical lives, and of connection in real time. And that became the focus of the next big, large ensemble remote music making project that Alarmable Sound took on, which is called Video Chat Variations. And so the idea for Video Chat Variations emerged from this brainstorming that the Alarmable Sound community did about music making in the pandemic. And we started talking about creating live performance experiences over the internet, and about the experience of having ourselves a live music making moment in real time together, and then about sharing that with an audience, and exploring this medium of video chat that we all were spending so much time on and are spending so much time on, and treating it like an instrument, finding out, in the same way we do with a violin or an oboe, what can it do? What can it not do? What are the interesting limitations it has? And how can we make music out of them? And the goal with this was to make music that would be really of this moment, that would use the resources at hand, and that would truly be made for those resources. Not taking concert music and performing it on the internet, which is sort of like adapting a book into a movie, but rather asking ourselves, what would music look and sound like if it was made really for this new medium? And so we began conversations with composers about making music for this. And the first three that we signed up were David Lang and Meredith Monk and Taishan Suri, which is a pretty cool group of people to be making video chat variations with us. I'm going to talk a little about the process with Meredith Monk, because she is the first one whose piece we have finished and now released. So when we started talking with Meredith, the conversation quickly got to this question of delay and of lag, which, as we all know, is a essential, endemic, unavoidable part of the online making experience. If you've tried to sing happy birthday together with your friends online, you know that trying to perform music together in real time is not totally possible. And so that was something which could be a limitation, which is a limitation of music making online in real time. But Meredith connected it with an idea she'd been exploring based on Indra's net, which is a metaphor used in Buddhism to explore the idea of interconnectedness. And Meredith was imagining doing something with musical loops that would be not quite aligned. And this connected for her with a kind of social idea, which is the notion that even when we are all, as people, not exactly in sync with each other, we can still move forward together, and the world moves forward together with us. So she was really interested in exploring this idea of creating music where there would be a deliberate misalignment between the parts. And so we set up in Alarmable Sound a technical committee and began to search for a platform for doing this. So we knew that we would need video, which allowed the players to see each other and also for the audience to see the players. We knew we would need a high quality audio, again, both for the recording, but also for the players to hear each other. And we knew we needed a way for many players to make sound at once. We concluded we couldn't use one platform for both video and audio because of, well, for one, the poor quality that audio has on video chat platforms. Also for the limitation that all of the video chat platforms seem to have as far as how many people can make sound at the same time. So if you try this in Zoom, that 3 people can make sound at the same time, but if more people try to make sound simultaneously on a Zoom call, Zoom will start cutting people out. So it can't hear more than 3 people at once. And that obviously is a limitation that we, as a group of 16 players, would love to get around. And so for the video needs we knew we had were to be able to record simultaneously people's individual shots, as well as record a group shot that shows like the what do you call it in Zoom? The I can't remember the mode where you gallery mode. That's right, gallery mode. So what we settled on was a combination of Zoom for video and a platform called Jamulus for audio. Jamulus is not a new platform, but it's solid. It's been around for a while, and it met our needs of being, high quality and stable, and easy enough for players to install, and one that allowed everybody to hear everybody else and to create their own mixes so that everybody can make their own, a mix of, who they want to hear louder or softer as meets their own needs. So our process for this, we had our sound engineer work with each player in the group to get them set up with an audio interface, with a microphone, and with a wired internet connection, because it turns out that for low latency audio, high quality audio, that wired internet is way better than Wi-Fi. And so everybody in the group had an individual consultation with our sound engineer, and we then organized these, what we called pre-workshops, where subsets of the ensemble, like 2, 3, 4 players at a time, would gather with Daniel, our sound engineer, and Peter, who's our assistant director of artistic planning, and they would just work through their setups, make sure that everybody's setup was working fine. And there were huge headaches in this process. This all took, and again, this is the theme of work in the pandemic, a ridiculous amount of time. I was in Germany at the time, and it turns out that German government internet is not compatible with Jamulus. So we couldn't find a way on the internet that I had at the Opera House where I was working to get me onto the Jamulus setup with everyone else. And I had to eventually go figure out another solution in my hotel. And there was tons of that. There were tons of problems that had to be solved. And we also ended up developing rehearsal protocols for this new way of working, which are really different from the protocols that we had developed over 20 years for working together in regular rehearsals. We had a server manager, which was our executive director, Gavin Schuck. Jamulus requires a central server, and Gavin set up a server using Google Cloud, which lives in the Google server in the Google Cloud. And Gavin was responsible for running that and making sure that that was running smoothly for each session. We had a video director, which was also Gavin Schuck, our executive director. And it was Gavin's role as the video director to coach all the players in their video, make sure that their frame was set right, deal with any lighting issues, and also sort of direct the shoot. In each performance, Gavin was, through Zoom, selecting which camera was live at any time. We had our sound engineer, who was responsible for dealing with any issues that came up, anybody's sound setup, which turns out to be quite hard. Our sound engineer, Daniel, is great and is used to working in situations where if there's a problem, he can go fix it himself, because that's what usually happens when you're at a mixing board and players have microphones and you can go there and like adjust the player's microphone. This was a very different situation because the players were all in their own spaces, and Daniel could advise, but couldn't actually fix anything. The player had to do it themselves. We had a rehearsal director who was me, and we had 2 people in the group who were responsible for dealing with any setup issues that came up. And we had a whole protocol worked out for side conversations, because we're a group of 16 members of Alarmable Sound, me, staff members who were helping, plus Meredith Monk and her singers. So it was a large group, 21 people in this. And so we worked out a protocol for any side conversations that had to happen being on text, so as not to crowd out the main text, the main thread in the Jamulus chat. We also developed a protocol for everybody to arrive early, just like you do at an actual rehearsal, with the idea that by the time the rehearsal is scheduled to begin, everybody should have their setup working, their mix set the way they want, and be ready to play, which is something we're used to in actual rehearsals, but in video chat, and I think we all sort of started with the idea that, oh, well, you just show up when it's time to join the call. And it turns out that doesn't work that well for this, because everybody does time to deal with issues. The first rehearsal was quite scary. This was all a very new way of working. And it took an enormous amount of patience, even with all the advanced work we had done. Still, we were about an hour and a half into rehearsal before we were actually able to start playing together. It really took like 75 to 90 minutes just to get everybody up to speed, iron out any issues. And the members of Alarm Will Sound and Meredith were all incredibly patient with the process, which was great and essential. And Meredith's music, which is very peaceful and beautiful and tranquil, was just the thing we needed to get into this, to sort of settle into this new way of making music together. We decided not to actually perform live. We thought about it, but for this first time out, we felt like the obstacles of being 100% sure that all 21 players were 100% ready to go at the same time, at a specified time, was just not worth it. It was too great a risk. That's something I made you for the future, but we decided for this first time out with video chat variations to rehearse, to record it live in real time, but then show it separately, to not actually try to perform it live. We made a bunch of discoveries in the process. One is that multi-track recording is absolutely essential. I think we didn't really fully appreciate that at the beginning, and we were lucky that Jamulus allows multi-track recording. But with 21 players, each of whom is their own sound engineer, getting everybody's mix level just right for the entire piece in one take would have been too hard. It was essential that we be able to record in multi-track so that afterwards Daniel and Meredith and I could go through and mix, like as you would a normal recording, mix the various voices. We also found that, in the pre-workshops where there were just a few members of the ensemble gathering, there was this wonderful communal feeling of like being back in a rehearsal together, where it was casual and there were spontaneous interactions. And even with a group that is as friendly and familiar with each other as Alarm Will Sound, that became much harder in the full group. Once we got to this full 21-person ensemble, folks really had to transition into Zoom etiquette, where if you have something you really have to say, you say it, and then you mute yourself so as not to, distract or disturb. And that was a bit of a loss because Alarm Will Sound's culture is very much about collaboration and about a sort of free and spontaneous exchange of ideas. And so we're thinking about how to bring that back into our online interactions. But there were really interesting possibilities that came up across us. One is this new approach to time that we discovered. Meredith's piece was all about this idea of things being like moving together but not quite in sync with each other. And that made for a really interesting experience of time that was quite different. Everyone in the ensemble was making individual choices about who to follow. Some people would follow someone by ear, some people would follow someone by watching them. And so it was this really interesting approach to time that I hadn't quite experienced before, where we are all playing in time, but the alignment is, we're all sort of in the same tempo, but not quite lined up with each other. Because even if I choose to watch Peter's mallets and play with them, because of the lag, what comes out in the final recording won't be exactly that. And meanwhile, while I'm trying to play with Peter's mallets, I might be distracted by someone else who's playing a little behind me and have to not be pulled into their time world. So it's a very interesting experience of time that is really different from anything that I'd encountered before. And then also the fact of having everyone on video chat with their own individual microphone makes for a really interesting visual sonic possibility of distance and volume that I hadn't quite experienced before, where that, players, by getting really close to the microphone and the screen, can play something very quietly that you hear very loud because it's right up close. And then because microphones often have a response that falls off so quickly, and because we're not in an acoustic environment, a player can walk, 5 feet away and the screen still sees them, but suddenly they're much quieter. Can be really, and they, at 6 or 7 feet away, depending on the microphone, a player can play really loudly, and you can see that in the screen, and you can see the effort they're putting into making that sound. But then the actual sound is really quiet and delicate because of the difference and the microphone response. so that was a really interesting discovery that I expect we'll make more of in future video chat variations pieces. So we released this as a live stream a couple of weeks ago. And again, I'm not going to play it because time is tight, but I will put a link. And I encourage you all to check it out afterwards. That's a link to the Meredith Monk performance video. We released this as a live stream event, and immediately after, Meredith and I took questions live. You know, that too, like with the Down Surroundings experience, was a really lovely chance to have a feeling of liveness and of connecting with an audience live and with our community live around a conversation about the piece. So I'll just say a few more things and I want to open it up to questions. This is really just the beginning of all of our work in this medium. There are lots of things that are very much on my mind to explore. At the top of that list is a more artistic use of video. You know, it is very hard to use video in an artful way when everyone is just dealing with their smartphones and the lights they have at home and the backdrop they have at home. And it's on our mind to want to push ourselves further into making these video chat variations work. Not just audio art, but video art. Also thinking about ways to bring more of the experience of live interactions into the world, and maybe including actual live performance, which we've shied away from so far, but continue to be interested in. And, you know, I imagine that for as long as the pandemic continues, Alarmable Sound will keep making music in this way. But also it's very much something on my mind. I'm curious about how this category of work of remote live music making will age as, you know, hopefully we get out of this time and back to a world where we can make music together on a stage in a space. And, you know, already the experience of this kind of music making has had a big impact for me. The creativity that it's called upon to find ways of making music together when we can't do what we're used to has opened up for me a sense of new possibilities for ways that we can bring composers' work out into the world that don't necessarily depend on a venue or on a presenter. And I think that those possibilities will continue to live with us even as hopefully we come back to a world of, you know, real life on stage music making. And that sense of new possibilities is I think the most exciting thing about these last few months for me. That experience I've talked about a bunch of feeling like I don't know what I'm doing. I've come to understand that experience is actually a sign that we are exploring new possibilities. And realizing that has helped me to get comfortable with the feeling of being terrified about the work that I'm doing and about not knowing always what the right answer is or what the right way forward is. Because I think that feeling of fear is about walking into the unknown and exploring new possibilities, which, you know, is what I think new music should always be about. So I will leave it there, but I am happy to take any questions and would love to hear from you all.
Well, thank you so much, Alan. That was really wonderful, and so such a great behind the scenes look at what you've been up to and just the amount of work that's gone into all these projects you've worked on. It's really quite fascinating, quite interesting. It enriches my experience having watched those videos of yours already. So anyone who's watching is welcome to, of course, write any questions into the chat. I guess I myself have a question maybe to start. You know, these two projects, they're so different. The main ones you talked about, the 10,000 screens and the Meredith Monk piece, you know, one is very highly curated and the other is dealing with, you know, sort of real-time delays and sort of things that we might think of as problems and making art out of them. But both I find are just such inventive ways to deal with certain constrictions, and like you say, like experimenting and finding new solutions to the circumstances you're in. And I just wonder, for you as an artist, you talked about doing more live performances online, but I also wonder, when we can go back out into the world and do live performances, do you think any aspects of these experiences will find their way somehow into the way you stage live events and make you think about live performance in perhaps new ways?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, as a conductor, and actually, honestly, being the kind of conductor that I am, I grew up through minimalism, really. Um, I've I tend to be a little obsessed about rhythm and about a kind of exactness that you can only achieve in when you are all playing together, on stage.
Right.
And this has really opened me up to other, like, the kind of expression, um, uh, expressive possibilities of music that's not about that. And so for me as a
Yeah.
conductor, that really expanded my mind. And even more, like, bigger than that, I think, oh gosh, this is a big question. Something else we've had to look at, and this is a whole other topic, which I won't get into right now, is social distance performance, which also demands a kind of greater flexibility and greater forgiveness about, like, how together things are in a conventional sense, because when players are really spread apart, and especially if you want to make music that really is designed for players who are to be spread apart, again, like, you have to be open to different kinds of coordination than what we're used to on stage. And so that has really opened up my imagination. I imagine that that these possibilities, both of especially of socially distant performance, are going to be with us. And I think also the technical things that we've been playing with are going to enter our live performance. I know that the work that I did with 10,000 birds, 10,000 screens. I know already that people who've seen that are thinking about new ideas for live performance, based on things they saw in that video, and that's really exciting to me.
Wonderful. Okay, we've got a question from the audience. I'm just going to read from you. This is from my colleague Apichai, and he says, "Hello, it's very amazing to see how you create and face all the problems. And may I ask a question? It seems to me that there was quite a lot of expense as to having a sound engineer, video engineer, and others to produce this wonderful work. I wonder how you support the budget you put on and how you earn income through this, because it's not a live concert."
Yeah, that's a great question. So the short answer is donations and grants. Alarmable Sound has a development manager, and we have an executive director who's very much engaged, and we have a board, and they're all very much engaged in fundraising. And so our work is really supported through foundations and through donors. It is very much on our mind that we have gotten used to a world now where online content is free, and that may be problematic in the long run. And so the question of how to bring in money from the actual performance is very much something we're thinking about. But so far, this work has all been funded through donations and grants. And I do want to say everyone was paid for their work. No one volunteered their time.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Maybe I actually have one, if you don't mind. It's really wonderful examples you've shown to us, and it just kind of made me wonder, as you are all professional musicians, what do you expect that the music institution should teach our students nowadays, given that with all this kind of thing that you've been doing, all editings, and you mentioned about it has to know a bit more about sound engineering as well, because sound engineer could not be there to help you. So what would you like to say to music institutions nowadays?
Yeah, No, that's a wonderful question. I mean, first of all, I really want to encourage schools to create opportunities for their students to make musical projects online. There's a project that I teach at the Bean School of Music at Northwestern University. And there's a project there. It hasn't come out yet because it's taking an absurd amount of time to get it done. But a group of conductors there has put together this project of Orfeo. It's an adaptation of Monteverdi's Orfeo, which they were gonna do, and it's an online version. I've seen some of the footage and it's amazing. And so I really want to encourage universities to create opportunities for their students to do this. But maybe even more than that, I think universities should support students in making their own discoveries. One of the great things that, I went to the Eastman School of Music in Rochester, and one of the most amazing things that university did for me was give some funding support to this idea that I and some friends of mine had to start a new music ensemble called OSEA. And that new music ensemble became the beginning of Alarm Will Sound. And I think, it was that support which was really like money and sort of spiritual guidance and consultation, and just belief, like the fact that the university believed in us enough to give us the support to make that project happen, set my whole career in motion. And when I look at students now, like so many of the smart, creative kids that I work with are doing these like amazing things online already. And I'm envious of the kind of comfort that my students have in working with video and putting out ideas online, and even just like talking on Twitter. Like that is not as natural to me because I grew up in an age where that wasn't due. And so I think a really great thing that universities can do for their students and also for the field as a whole is to support students and encourage students to come up with their own ideas and do their own creative work, which will be great for them, and honestly probably like better and more creative than the things that we all as older people will come up with.
Wonderful. Maybe one last question, if I may.
Yeah, please.
As a conductor, what do you see is going to change after this? Because I mean, for musicians, they are exploring different kind of things and they can make sound. But in your case, you're probably the first conductor that I've seen making this huge transition. I mean,
yeah.
What's next?
Right.
For other fellow
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, well, first of all, like, there's this whole other side of what I'm doing right now, which is socially distant performance. And, there are whole other challenges in that because, if you're trying to play music together where you're far apart, but the music actually is, the kind of music we're used to that requires us to be very precisely together, that puts more pressure on the conductor. It means there's more need for things like monitoring so players can stay close together, and those are new challenges. But I also think that in so many ways, I think the pandemic has furthered and pushed faster changes that were already happening. And one of those changes, I think, is that conductors are becoming more programmers and curators and entrepreneurs than people who than just people whose job is to wave their arms around and conduct music. And I think that's been hastened by this. In the projects I shared with you right now, I'm not conducting. They're both, these are both projects that I was instrumental in creating and envisioning, but I'm not doing the thing I went to school to do. I'm not conducting. And I think probably there will be more of that. To me, like what drew me to conducting is a love for bringing people together to make music together. And for me, that's what conducting has always been about first and foremost. And what's happening now is taking me back to those roots. And my work is, again, more about that. And sometimes that manifests in actually conducting, but many times it doesn't. And that's great too.
Well, thank you so much, Alan. This has been a really wonderful presentation and discussion, and we're so happy you could join us late at night for this talk. It was really wonderful. So I hope everyone will check out those links in the chat that link to Alan's projects. You can also find them on the Alarm Will Sound website. And thanks again. All right, I think
yeah, thank you, Alyssa and Mate, and thank you to PJ Vim for having me for this. It's very, very cool to talk to you all.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I can say that I will never look at my apartment the same way anymore. So thank you so much. And
that means a lot.
Look forward to maybe collaborating sometimes with PGIM in the near future. So thank you so much.
That would be lovely.
So much inspiration.
Thank you.
Thank you.